Good evening, folks, and welcome to another edition of Crime Time with DutyRon. Guys and girls, you know the drill. We are retired New York City police detectives, and if you like all things true crime related from the police detective's perspective, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you'll get all things DutyRon and Ed Wallace when he's available when we go live or upload another video. Hey, tonight, as promised, folks, we have a really special show for you. We're going to do an analysis of Bryan Kohberger with a forensic psychologist, Dr. Joni Johnston. She's here again tonight to grace us with her knowledge. And we also have retired homicide detective Sgt. Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. These two have tremendous amount of knowledge in the investigation field. And, you know, we're going to get into a lot of conversation because the last time we had Dr. Joni Johnston on with us, we didn't have a perpetrator in custody. Now we have Bryan Kohberger in custody, innocent until proven guilty, folks, but he stands charged with murder in the first degree ×4 and a burglary felony charge. Before we get into it, I want to say a special thank you to you, the Patreon supporters, the channel members, and all of the folks who positively engage in this community. You know, you guys are what makes this a great place. And Ed and I give thanks and praise to each and every one of you for your feedback, for your engagement, for the questions you ask, and for the way you carry yourselves. You guys are second to none, and we give you thanks and praise each and every day. I want to play a little piece here because this is going to tie into the conversation that we're going to have with Dr. Joni Johnston. It's a piece from News Nation, and they go over some of Bryan Kohberger's writings early on from 2011 when he was younger, and we talk a little bit about some of his disturbing writings online. And again, these are all unverified by law enforcement. All of the things you're going to hear are, again, from sources. And we talked about the sources, right? Sources sometimes are not reliable. So we need to take this all with a grain of salt, but we do want to talk with our forensic psychologist, and we want to compare some of these notes and get her take on these things. So without further ado, I'm going to just play this real quick. We're going to play this piece, and then I'll get right with you guys.
That he apparently wrote before the murders, more than 10 years before, when he was just a teenager. This one from 2011 reads, quote, "Everything I have ever done makes no sense. How did things get this way? How am I wearing this shirt? And who decided that humans shall wear shirts like this? Are we all just advanced animals with possession, or is there more that I can't see? I can't connect." He also wrote, quote, "I often find myself making simple human interactions, but it is as if I am playing a role-playing game, such as Oblivion. I can see what is going on. I am slightly into it, but I can pause the game and focus on my real life. In this case, my life is the game, and my old self can be reached by pausing the game. But how? I often think of things that humans do, things I have done my whole life. I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth, as I am starting to view everyone as this." He discussed his family and childhood as well and predicted what his future would be. Quote, "I think about my father, what a good man he is, how I treat him like dirt because I have this condition and I can't take it. I might spiral out of control and lose myself in the void. I can't let it all go. All of these regrets I predict for my future self. All of these thoughts of remorse, I got this when I was in a stage of discovery. Now I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, tired, useless, and stupid man in the mirror. He is a complete disgrace. He doesn't even deserve to live." He also had some exchanges with other contributors, including one that got combative. After he posted a long comment about fad diets that he said helped with a medical condition, other users challenged him, calling him an advertiser, maybe a scammer. He responded by writing, quote, "I wouldn't fall for a scam. That's the difference between me and everyone on here." He followed a combative post with this emoji, a knife plunging through a head. The posts were uncovered by the Hidden True Crime podcast.
So I wanted to play that for you guys because I thought it was very relevant to the conversation that we're going to have here tonight. Without further ado, I want to introduce to you a repeat guest here on Crime Time with DutyRon. She is a great friend of our community. We all know and love her. Dr. Joni Johnston, thank you so much for taking out the time of your busy schedule to be here with Crime Time with DutyRon community.
It is always such a pleasure.
You know, and we have Bill Cannon. I want to bring him in real quick. But before I bring him in, I want to get your take on that piece that I just played from a forensic psychologist side. I found it troubling to hear that when I first read it, and then now hear, Banfield putting this back out again, in addition to the new revelations that are unverified sources that he was fired from his teacher's assistant's position at the Washington State University. Just your thoughts on that, that conversation that he put out on the internet.
Well, a couple of things that come to mind immediately. One is, this is a teenager. And I say that because, any of us who've had teenagers as clients or as children, and I've had both of them, know that things are very intense when you're a teenager. Emotions are very intense, feelings are very intense, thoughts are very intense. And so this is obviously somebody who's going through a significant amount of emotional distress. This is clearly not a happy person. And there's been a lot of speculation, I think, in terms of him talking about not feeling anything. Is this some kind of predisposition to psychopathy? And it could be. Certainly, we look into the future and see what he's done since then, or allegedly done since then. But I also think this is somebody who's deeply unhappy. And there's a lot, I think, of depression in what he's writing there. The question is, of course, how long has this been going on? And what is going on in his life that is causing him to feel so worthless and so disconnected, and almost like he's dissociating from his life, like he says he's watching a movie. So there's a lot going on, and he's apparently trying to figure this out, but feeling very discouraged and depressed at this time, which I think is so interesting, Ron, because I think it's rare if this is an accurate source. If Bryan Kohberger is guilty of the murders he's committed of accusing, I think what's interesting about this is we see, I think, somewhat of an evolution, because I've certainly evaluated many and talked with and treated many violent offenders. And I can certainly say that I think there's a genetic predisposition to some aggression or to psychopathy, but I've never met somebody that I thought was a born murderer. And oftentimes when you go back in childhood, you will see this kind of evolution from somebody who's having trouble, having behavior problems, disconnected, depressed, and then this anger starts building up. And then the empathy, if there was empathy, goes away. And then everything kind of channels into this rage and need for revenge. And I think we could potentially be seeing that here.
Absolutely. And this is what a lot of people were troubled with, is this last piece, April 21st, this last post, April 21st, 2011, and he puts the knife through an emoji of a head here. So to most of the folks in the chat, and I saw some of the reactions, people were like, that is troubling. Any take on something like this, fast forward from 2011 to now 2022, these murders taking place? Any significance on that? I mean, I know it's, like you said, a childhood post or adolescent post, but still, nonetheless, a little
Well, so
that.
I can tell you, as a psychologist, if I read this post from somebody who was a client of mine or a friend of mine's child or whatever, I would be very concerned about this person. Okay. This person is struggling. This person is saying they feel worthless. And when people feel worthless, they often feel like they have very little to lose. And so I would be concerned about that. The emoji, again, I take it with a grain of salt, only because, one of the things you and I've talked about so often is that when we know the outcome or potential outcome of the story, it's almost impossible to kind of go back and look at things objectively. Everything becomes filtered or clouded by that. And so now that looks very alarming.
Yeah.
Absolutely. At the time, was it? We don't know.
Right. A lot of his talk was negative there. He's putting himself down, saying that he felt worthless, showing no emotion towards his father, who he called a good man. So many writings here. Hey, but I wanted to bring on a fan favorite Retired Homicide Detective Sgt. Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. He was kind enough to grace us tonight with his presence. And, you know, with his experience, I think he has a lot to put into the conversation. Bill, thanks for joining us here tonight.
My pleasure, and it's this is the second time I've been on with Dr. Joni, and it's a pleasure. She's a great great psychologist, and I enjoy her. You know, so many talking heads, profilers, and behavioral analysts during this case that I'm losing my mind over that many of them. You know, and it's if I can just say, you know, everyone was an amateur sleuth on this case and predicting who this person was going to be. But what's most important to me is that the behavioral analysis didn't lead to capturing Bryan Kohberger. What led to capturing him was something called evidence, you know? And to me, that's great because I sort of view as, you know, behavioral analysis as sort of like a junk science. And I don't mean any disparaging toward Dr. Joni. She's a true PhD, a psychologist, and she has all that training. But there's so many people that just put their opinion out there, and many of them got this right. Oh, I mean, we predicted it. We said, oh, he's a male white. He's about 28 to 35. He's probably from the area. I predicted it incorrectly. I said he's probably a townie, and that was incorrect. But everything else was sort of straight on. So how much training did you need to be a profiler in this? But at the end of the day, profiling who this might have been before he was captured wasn't important. The most important thing is the evidence and what led to capturing or getting probable cause to arrest Bryan Kohberger. I don't believe the prosecution will use any of this behavioral analysis to prosecute him. Maybe the defense will.
Absolutely. I feel strongly that the defense will definitely look into using this because at this point in time, based on what we know, they do have a substantial amount of evidence. Now, when we talk about the sheath and the DNA, the touch DNA on the sheath, we don't have a full picture of all the cards are not exposed to us in the public. And that's what all of our listeners have to understand is that, you know, we as investigators, we remember you especially, Bill, when you had your homicide cases, you would always say this, and we'd always say this as investigators, the press, the news can be our best friend and our worst enemy. And we would hold so much close to the vest about our cases because we didn't want to go to trial and lose the case to information being put out there. But I wanted to talk to you quickly, Dr. Joni, is about this psychotic disorder, the social disorders that we are looking at and hearing some of his friends talk about, that he was bullied in high school, not just only by the male population, but predominantly the female population. And this is coming from his friends' interviews with the news. And there was also talks about him harassing up to current date female employees at restaurants and so forth. Is this kind of behavior indicative of somebody that suffers from like the psychotic disorder or something of that nature?
Well, I definitely want to respond to that, but I do want to just, if it's possible, just mention or respond to Bill's comment as well, because
sure.
Bill, I have to say, I completely agree with you. I think as a forensic psychologist, I really am often most valuable in a couple of situations. One is in trying to look at the past and prevent things from happening to other people in the future. So I'm interested in looking at, for example, Bryan Kohberger's past to kind of go, okay, what are the risk factors for somebody who might commit these kind of things so we can intervene with children or teenagers who are exhibiting those kinds of signs. Or looking at somebody's mental health and looking at how that might be a mitigator is we're talking about here. But in terms of looking at somebody's behavior profile and saying, okay, based on their behavior, I can predict what they're going to do, I think it's very difficult. And I absolutely think it never trumps the evidence. So I just want to get that out there and say, I think we're on the same team when it comes to that, for sure.
I'm glad. I want you on my team.
I was worried that
absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, you look at practical things, you look at the evidence and those kinds of things.
You know, Dr. Joni, if I could just say, that's where the separation comes in, is that people believe the press like owns this case. Like they're telling how it's going to go, and this is what we're concerned. No, you have nothing to do with it. The police are the ones, the arbiters of what's important in this case and how they're going to proceed with it, not the press. So even some of the stuff that Ashley Banfield and some of the other stations are covering, it's not important. But when people hear it, they're like, oh my God, this has to be so important. But it's not. What's really important is the evidence. And as I said, the behavioral analysis, I love it. It's so interesting. It's in the true crime community. People love that kind of stuff. But guess what? That's not what's going to get him convicted of this horrific crime. It's going to be the evidence that's going to get him convicted.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And to kind of get to your point, Ron, or the questions that you were having, there's all kinds of research that has been done talking about the effects of bullying, the effects of bullying by different genders. The effects of childhood trauma in general. And so we know that there's relationships between being a victim and potentially being a perpetrator in the future. It's very complicated. We certainly can't say, oh, everybody who's been bullied at some point, no matter how severely, is going to turn around and try to hurt other people. It is more complicated than that. There's always this kind of nature versus nurture thing. There's always this kind of, almost like a recipe to get to the point where this murder happened. It is complicated. But, am I surprised that if you have somebody who goes in and commits a mass murder, that they have a history of bullying or a history of being mistreated in some way? No, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to also, if you could walk, some of the folks are new. We keep gaining new subscribers as we go along here. I know in the last appearance that you were on with us, I asked you about the 4 roles, for a forensic psychologist, and the clinical, the experimental, and so forth. Could you just explain? And I know this may be redundant, but I think it would be important for some of the folks that are newly coming on and haven't heard you. Could you just explain to them the role of forensic psychologist?
Absolutely. So forensic psychology is a pretty broad term that just means using psychology in an attempt to assist with some kind of legal question. And so that could mean a bunch of different things. It could mean in a custody evaluation, doing an evaluation of both parents and with the children to see who might be the best parent or how to divide up the custody. It might mean being if somebody's in a car accident and they're claiming emotional distress, or they have post-traumatic stress disorder, evaluating to see if that person A has PTSD, and if they do, is it a result of the car accident? And then what I do is in the criminal arena, and that can be a lot of different things, ranging from is this person not guilty by reason of insanity? Do they have some kind of psychosis at the time of the offense? And if so, were they unable to appreciate what they were doing, that it was wrong? All the way to, are they, can they assist with their counsel? Again, last example would just be looking at somebody who's about to be released on parole and looking at their violence risk. So anytime there is a potential legal question and psychology can help with that, you will typically find a forensic psychologist.
Well, there you have it, folks. That was, that broke it down real well, and I appreciate you condensing that. I wanted to show the audience now. Again, we spoke earlier in the beginning of the show here. Ashley Banfield, News Nation, they put out another piece that is unconfirmed, but she said she has 3 sources. Now, the reason I want to play this is because I want to see if this can somehow tie back into his earlier post, the behavior that's explained in this alleged, I want to call it a reprimanding in his first semester at Washington State University as a teacher's assistant. He didn't last, according to this leaked source, that he was fired from his position. So I wanted to play that real quick for you and then come back and ask you and Bill if you have anything to interject into it. But I want to play this so you guys can see and hear. I'm not going to play it all, but I'm just going to play a little piece of it.
Job as a teaching assistant in his doctoral program, which may or may not have been tied to his teaching job. September 23rd, Kohberger apparently has an altercation with one of the professors named Dr. Snyder. Just 10 days later, on October 3rd, the letter outlines that they had met to, quote, discuss the norms of professional behavior. And then 18 days after that, on October the 21st, Dr. Snyder emails Bryan Kohberger to say that he has, quote, failed to meet the expectations that were outlined in the discussions they'd had before. 12 days after that, on November the 2nd, they met again to discuss what they called an improvement plan. And then on December the 7th, that's about, well, let's cut to actually 12 days later, 11 days later, the murders actually happen. So they have the meeting to discuss the improvement plan. And 11 days later, on November 13th, the murders are carried out. Then cut forward to 24 days beyond, and that's December 7th. That's when there was another meeting with the professors. And this was supposed to be about the progress of the, quote, improvement plan. Apparently, it didn't go too well because 2 days later, on December 9th, he had another altercation with Dr. Snyder. And here's the quote, in which it became apparent that you had not made progress regarding professionalism. 10 days after that, December 19th, Bryan Kohberger is officially terminated by Washington State University. And some are reporting that he was withdrawn from the data system 3 days later on December the 22nd. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com.
All right. So I wanted to just, again, play that, Dr. Johnston, just to put in perspective what we're looking at here. Behavior that is requiring a correction. What's your thoughts on this?
Immediately. One is somebody who's been in a doctoral program. I will tell you, and you can see this from this timeline, that most universities will bend over backwards to keep somebody once you're in that PhD program. And obviously he was given several different chances to change his behavior. So the fact that he was given that many warnings, that much coaching, and failed to, kind of change his behavior certainly says something about his personality and where he is in life. That he is, at this point, has convinced himself, perhaps, that he knows everything, knows more than the professors, doesn't need to follow the rules, is unwilling to, to abide by what the university is asking. And there can be tremendous consequences for that. I mean, some of these teaching positions can be tied to funding, can be tied to housing. They can even be tied to continuing the graduate program. So I don't know for him what those ramifications would be. But this is an extremely, extremely serious thing. And it's also a rare thing to see something like that. So the fact that he is continuing his behavior just means to me that this is somebody who is set on a certain course, whatever that is, and he is not at this point going to deviate from it. He is convinced he's right. He's convinced that he is on a certain path. And again, nothing's going to keep him from that.
Yeah. Bill, any thoughts on this release stuff? And, she says it's the sources. I get pissed off about that, unverified sources. But what's your thoughts on that, Sarge?
When I saw this, I couldn't help but be amused by it. I was like, oh, he refused to listen and follow directions. He forgot to erase his blackboard. He was rude to his students. But November 13th, he killed 4 people. So that sort of erases and all this other stuff that's so unimportant now. Well, yes, it shows his behavior was aberrant, but he killed, at least he's being charged with the murder of 4 people. And December 30th, he's arrested for murdering those 4 people. And he's caught doing things like washing his car at 4 o'clock in the morning to cover up evidence and throwing his garbage in his neighbor's garbage. So all of those things, yeah, they should put that on his report card too. It struck me as a little bit amusing. Maybe that's the cynical cop in me, but it did strike me as a little bit amusing.
I got the same vibe and reaction to it. But listen, at the end of the day, we heard in the beginning of this, very early on when Kohberger was first arrested, we heard some of the people from his past, high school past, talk about his heroin addiction. There was a guy who came on, I believe, with a couple of different news agencies, not just News Nation. It was a male. He came on and said that he used to take rides with him, and they would go and cop their drugs, and they would hang out together. And he seemed to be pretty cool guy. And then there was this morph. He went from a very heavy 300-pound guy to thin, and then he became aggressive, is what these people were describing in this interview that I listened to. And they said he just changed. He evolved into this controlling. They didn't say muscular. They just said that he was hands-on. A guy was saying that he was putting him in headlocks and so forth and things of that nature. So that's what I thought of to bring up here with you, Dr. Johnston, is to see if this is anything that's indicative of some of the prior cases maybe that you've interviewed and covered in the past. Is this any type of behavior that you would see from somebody who would go out and kill multiple people?
Well, what's interesting, I would like to know more of a timeline for him in terms of, are they saying that, and I've read in a couple of comments that people have said that when he began doing heroin, he became more aggressive. And that surprised me because I see and interview, violent offenders weekly. And substance abuse is there the majority of the time at some level. Typically, when I'm seeing violent offenders who are using substances and becoming more aggressive, they're things like meth and cocaine and those kinds of things, maybe PCP. The few guys I see that are doing heroin, other than they're doing kind of a speedball with cocaine, which
Right.
can also be aggressive, the heroin tends to be used by people who want to kind of mellow out, right? It is I don't associate that with somebody using heroin and becoming more aggressive. So that is a disconnect for me. And Bill, I'd be interested in your perspective on that from your law enforcement, and yours as well, Ron.
Dr. Joni, I always would think of drug abuse as the chicken or the egg thing. Is he a criminal because he uses drugs, or does he use drugs because he's a criminal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I also think, though, it is interesting. I think that there's often this kind of, right, like you said, a circle where you don't know where to start. Where's the start? Where's the starting point of the circle? Because it becomes a feedback loop over time. But I also do think there's something interesting about the drugs of choice people have. Whether it is meth, which has different effects on the body than heroin. And that's why I think had read a couple of comments that people saying, oh, he became aggressive while doing heroin. I'm not disputing that if that's somebody's memory of him or whatever. I'm just saying, in my experience as a forensic psychologist and working with inmates and, evaluating them, typically the more aggressive or guys who are already aggressive, as you were saying, are seeking more aggression to kind of feed off of that. They don't pick heroin to do that.
Hey, Doc, I think what I failed to probably convey is that they were talking about his drug use, but then they were saying when he morphed from a 300-pounder to a more thin, athletic guy, he became aggressive. And we know heroin users, they nod off. That heroin junkie nod, whatever, they're continually falling asleep on you, and it's a mellowing drug. So it wasn't while he was doing that drugs, the heroin. It was when he morphed into a physically fit guy. So when he started losing the weight, he became aggressive. And I have that clip of his friend talking about that. But I just thought that it would. What I'm trying to say is to put together a picture for our audience and for the people who are following this. How does somebody morph into a smart, intelligent person that was, engaging with society without killing people throughout his whole teenage years of high school, and then going into his college, he now allegedly turns into a person who murders 4 people.
So a couple of things kind of come to mind for me, Ron. One is that, and I'll fall back on my academic training for this to start with. When you look at this whole issue of bullying and, being a victim of bullying or being a perpetrator of bullying, it's kind of interesting because what you find is about, when you look at the kind of the bullying, I guess, population, if you will, you have about a third of the people are victims of bullying and never bully anybody else. And you have about a third who are bullies and they're never victimized. And then you have a group that's kind of interesting who do what it sounds like, again, if our sources are correct, are more like Bryan, who were once victims of bullying. And at some point, something shifts. maybe they develop physically, lose weight, whatever, they change over time, and they become bullies themselves. And what's interesting about that is if you look at the literature, you find that individuals who are kind of bullies and victims are ones who are likely to be more aggressive overall and also to have more psychological problems. And so I can't certainly say that that's Bryan, but I can certainly say that that's consistent with the literature.
Right. Yeah, makes sense right there. I just, for me, I get so confused because again, Bill and I, we look at this from a law enforcement perspective. We're looking for evidence. We're looking to, put the pieces of the puzzle together, so to speak. And when we talk about this stuff, and again, Bill said it well. A lot of times, your job it comes into play, and it's not always, but it comes into play after these people are taken into custody to try to understand and get that, as Bill say, that perpology, like what makes these perpetrators tick. So I think that it's important for the audience to understand what a forensic psychologist's job is and how vast and wide it is, because one of our users sent an email message to me and said, hey, the FBI had 2 behavioral analysis folks assigned to this case. Remember this, Bill, when they listed all of the people, 50 FBI agents, but there was 2 BAU guys there, whether they were guys or girls. And people were saying, well, why do they need 2? Why would they need 2? Do they work in teams and so forth? I don't have the answer to that, why they brought 2 in there. Some would argue and say, well, maybe they thought that there was multiple perpetrators, maybe one for each, or a guy and a girl. I don't know how they do this. Do you have any knowledge on the behavioral analysis people, Bill?
No, I'm just, I was really interested in it from this case to watch it, because in my experience on the NYPD, we never ever used a behavioral analyst ever, and people are shocked at that. Oh my God, we never used polygraphs and we never used behavioral analysts. But I'm still interested in what behavioral analysts say and how they come to a conclusion. But I've watched a lot of it over the years in the big crimes and I always mention the Beltway sniper, and the behavioral analyst on that was so far off. I was like, I lost all faith in behavioral analysts. They said, oh, the perpetrator is a male, white, 28 to 35. He lives with his mother and he drives a green Camaro. It was so ridiculous. And it turned out to be a 17-year-old male black and a 32-year-old male black. So they were so far off the mark. Same thing really with the Unabomber.
Right.
They weren't on top of that either. If it wasn't for the Unabomber's brother to give him up, they would have never, they wouldn't have caught the guy. So, but I'm amused I shouldn't say amused. I'm interested in it because it is interesting. And everyone wanted to predict who was the murderer of these 4 young kids in this Idaho case. And most of us somewhat, right away you could say he's a male. Right away, 80, 90%. You can say, and some people were like, no, I think it's of 2 female. Like I was like, come on, stop. And the reasons you could give for why it was a male. And of course, that was the case. And then you talk about geographical profiling, and he probably lives in the area or very close to the college. And that was true too, you know? So all of these things, but you could deduct without going to Quantico and studying behavioral analysis with the FBI.
Right.
So
but to be fair to everyone here, not everybody is 100%. This is not a game of where we're not robots or machines. So, in the case that you're citing there, they were wrong. But, there's probably some cases where they might have been right that we have no knowledge of.
Absolutely. But Ron, my whole dissertation is the fact that that's not going to capture the perpetrator. Real detective work, real evidence, real crime work, that's going to catch the perp, not behavioral analysis.
I agree. Doc, any comments on it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. And again, I'm not in the law enforcement field, but I don't know that, today, at least from a behavioral analysis in terms of forensic psychology, that, even people who consider themselves profilers would think that this kind of analysis would be useful in picking out or identifying a suspect, out of the blue. I mean, my sense is that the way that things have kind of evolved over time is that perhaps, and behavioral analysis could be useful if you have a list of suspects in helping perhaps narrow them down. You know,
Right.
by applying some of the guesses or educated guesses that you have and trying to say, okay, if we have 5 suspects, let's start with this one because he looks the most promising based on A, B, C, D, and E. But to think that somebody can kind of go, we're going to, you know, we have a crystal ball and we can look in there and say he has a green Camaro. I don't know anybody who believes that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
I
No,
hope
I
not.
think it's just, I think it's important also not to like try to pigeonhole. Oh, these are the characteristics of a serial killer.
Right.
He kills animals when he's a kid. Some do, some don't, right?
Right.
And I mean, you know, all the pigeonhole characteristics they say about he's a loner, you know, he's, you know, when they talk about organized and disorganized offenders, there's different traits that each one has. But again, you have to be careful to not pigeonhole them into any, you know, behavioral analysis.
Hey, I want to just say hello to everybody in the chat. I see Tom Cusinelli is in the chat. Some of your people are coming on over, Bill, and just a whole bunch of folks coming on in and saying hello and thank you. Joey, thank you for the super chat. He says, I agree with Bill, like how Hinckley was found not guilty by insanity, but then released. Where are the specialists in that field? Hey, listen, again, we're not claiming to be perfect people here. This is a science. This is, you know, methods that they use to, you know, come up with this, come up with the tactics that are used and employed here. So I don't, listen, thank you for that super chat. But again, nothing here is a concrete, you know, step by step. This is what we do. It's all a fluid, ongoing operation, and no 2 cases are the same. And Bill, I know you could talk strongly about that because none of these cases are the same, and this one had quite a few, you know, different.
Well, you know, DutyRon, if I could just address this to Dr. Joni, what really would annoy me during this case was when profilers would speak, and not just profilers, others would speak in absolutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because nothing is absolute. There's always gray area somewhere, and you have to be willing to make a U-turn at a second's notice in this kind of business.
I completely agree with that, Bill. And the other thing I think becomes difficult sometimes, and I think we have to really guard against that no matter what profession we're in, is separating out the evidence from the theories about why the evidence is there. Because that's a tricky thing. You know, I know, for example, there was a lot of discussion about Bryan Kohberger's alleged kind of grading changes around the time of the murders.
Right.
I don't know if you remember reading about that, but people were saying, you know, some of his students were saying that he was incredibly unfair grader to some extent, not only in terms of, you know, grading women more harshly than men, but just really grading everybody at a PhD level when that wasn't where they were. And then all of a sudden around November, then he began giving everybody A's. And, you know, if you turn a paper in, you got an A. And there was a lot of theories that, okay, well, it was some kind of a release for him, right? Some psychological release, or he was happy and he was giving people grades. Well, we don't know that, right? But and now we have another theory, which is perhaps he's under the gun for grading people harshly or unfairly. He's on this kind of performance improvement plan. And so either he's mad and this is his way of kind of, you know, thumbing his nose or giving the finger to the administrators by saying, okay, I'll give everybody A's or whatever. We don't know that. Right. We can say, okay, the grading change, that's, you know, we can document that. But why is the hard part?
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, we don't know why he did what he did. And it almost, you know, some people on the one side are saying, well, maybe he was just disconnecting and he knew the gig was up. And he just started giving everybody right across the board, male and female, great grades. So that was a conversation that we saw come up quite a bit. I wanted to ask you before we get too deep into this, because we're getting close to the end. Catherine Ramsland from DeSales, who was his professor, you know, she had some in close contact with him. And I wanted to ask you what your thoughts on what would be her role going forward in this trial. Do you think that she'll be called in to testify about his behaviors and activities? Because his Reddit, not Reddit posts, his that that kind of questionnaire, or however you want to word it. He did that while he was under her with her studies. What would you do if you murdered someone? How would you act when you were leaving the scene? What kind of emotions did you feel? Any thoughts on that and that whole process for him and what he posted? Because many people are talking about that, Doc.
Yeah, I understand why. I mean, some of the questions were just so interesting because, anybody who works with offenders, and I know that both of you have worked with them for, 30 years apiece or whatever, that, most typical murderers aren't having that kind of premeditation and planning that he's asking them about. So that's kind of, in hindsight, it's kind of interesting that those questions were in there. I have the utmost respect for Dr. Ramsey. I know her personally, and I think she's just fantastic. In terms of whether she'll be called to testify, I think it depends on a couple of things. I'm sure she's probably already has been interviewed extensively, and it will depend upon how much knowledge she has, how much observation she did of him, and what kind of observations those were. Is it going to be helpful to the prosecution or the defense? I think will be the primary issue. And then, of course, this questionnaire has gotten so much media attention. I don't know if that will be something that she would be asked to evaluate. I mean, the other part of it is, research in criminal justice might look like this. And so I think she's going to have to talk to them about what does this mean? And is this significant to Bryan? Did she think it was? And looking back, does she think it is now?
Yeah. Yeah. Bill, you have any thoughts on that?
I just think there's a lot of, and look, I don't mean to be like cynical and not to believe a lot of this stuff, but I think at the end of the day, and I'm a cop and I think like a cop. And I think at the end of the day, what's most important is to get as much evidence as you possibly could and to have good people that can articulate that evidence on the stand and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this guy killed these 4 kids. All this other stuff to me is noise. And it's interesting, but it's noise to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people find it interesting, and your perspective obviously comes from that detective sergeant, homicide detective sergeant's role, and we all get that. At the end of this all, we're looking to get a successful prosecution, make this arrest, get your true bill indictment, and get the trial going, and put this guy away if in fact he's found guilty. But the bottom line here is that everybody that we have in our community in the chats, they are looking at all sides of the fence here. And the reason I asked you, Doctor, is, about his professor is because that was some of the most compelling information available online that was verified and legit, that he in fact did ask those questions, and it was an anonymous thing. And I asked a few people and I never was able to get an answer because I don't think anybody really knows, are those answers to that anonymous questionnaire, is that going to be made available to the investigators and the prosecution? That remains to be seen, because I don't know if that's private or public, information. I know it's not made public because nobody could see it, but it says you can answer these questions anonymously.
Anonymously, right? Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I think, Bill, it's funny because when you were on before, I'm hearing a very similar theme. I know how you feel about evidence, and again, I'm certainly not disagreeing with you on that. But I do think, as Ron, as you pointed out, that we all want to know. Not just the evidence, which is very important from a prosecution standpoint, is everything. But I think as human beings, we all want to try to understand why, why somebody would do something like this. And how do we recognize somebody who would do something like this? And even more importantly, from my perspective, which is prevention, how do we prevent things like this from happening again? And so the more information I think we have psychologically from people who are, violent offenders, the more we can work toward preventing these kinds of things from happening.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yeah, that's very important. We want to get to understand what makes people like this tick, and it's you guys that do that. You go to the jails, you go to the prisons, you interview these violent offenders, and you try to get into their mindset and try to understand why or what made them just snap, or what makes them tick, so to speak. Hey, I want to put you on the spot one more time, and then I mean, I love you and I appreciate that you being here. And you know, Bill's been racking up his points here. Everybody in the chats wants to kill you, Bill. You know, they're saying stop picking
Get in line.
Stop picking on Dr. Joni. And you know what? Listen, I know the angle that you're going with this because I watch, you know, Police Off the Cuff often. I watch the replays, and you know, these are hard-nosed gumshoes here that go out and hunt down murderers, and that's a whole science in itself. So I get it, Bill. Doc, if the defense, and I know a lot of forensic psychologists are hired by the defense, right? Forensic psychologists sometimes retired, or you know, defense.
It depends. It depends. I mean, oftentimes, you know, in our system, you have competing experts. Right. So almost always, if you have a defense expert, you're going to have a prosecution expert, and then you have to, you know, have the different testimonies, and then people have to decide who they're going to believe. So depending upon the question, you can have. I mean, I've been asked to testify, you know, when there was an opposing expert, which is great, right. But is it always that way?
What I wanted to ask you is this, and you may not be able to answer it, but this is a generated user audience generated question. If the defense was to get a forensic psychologist on their side to come in and testify, what would be some of the angles that they would look at based on what we know publicly available about Bryan Kohberger? What would a forensic psychologist bring up in a defense for this guy?
Okay, so you're talking the defense guy. So I think number one, I think it would be most effective in the penalty phase as opposed to the prosecution phase, because it's hard for me to think of any defense you could have. You know, I mean, there's no indication that there's any kind of insanity plea. Idaho doesn't even allow that, so that's out the table anyway. But even if it was allowed, he himself has said, I'm not mentally ill. There's no indication of that at all. So I don't know how it would be helpful to him at all, again, in the actual guilt phase of the trial. Right. I think if you're looking at it from a penalty phase, a lot of the things that you've already talked about, you know, you're going to have people coming in talking about his history of bullying, talking about his depression as a teenager, you know, talking about the stress he was under around the time of the offense, how he struggled socially. I mean, all those things. You're going to try to find somebody to tell this person's life story in a way that's going to, you know, try as much as possible, which is an enormous challenge and often does not work. You know, that this person is salvageable in terms of maybe he can be productive in prison, and also that maybe he should be in prison for life.
Right. Yeah. So that makes, I mean, you answered a lot of the questions of people in the audience and folks that are just following this. When would some angle of this sort be employed, and it would happen towards the penalty phase? And I think that makes sense, because this is really something that's very hard. People speak about his childhood and the bullying and the drug use and so forth, but you know that really can't be used as a defense for, you know, to justify murdering 4 people.
Right. Right.
Bill, I know you're itching, Cannon. I can see it. I know you so well.
I'm putting my shield up, Bill. I'm putting my psychic shield.
You know, look, I find all this psychology stuff really fascinating. I really do. But I also look at it from a perspective of, you can't make Bryan Kohberger sympathetic if he in fact did this. He's not a sympathetic character. You know what I mean? So all of this stuff, he was bullied, someone stole his sandwich from a lunchroom, whatever you want to say, it doesn't make him a sympathetic character. So that is not going to work in his defense. What's going to work is, you know, if attorneys for him can create doubt. That's all it's going to work. But the person that did this, and if it is Bryan Kohberger, he murdered 4 innocent kids, 20, 21-year-old kids. And a jury is not going to, you know, they're not going to be sympathetic to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is incredible. I mean, the reality is, if you are a mitigation expert, and sometimes forensic psychologists wear that hat, you know, you work with what you have. Right. I mean, all you can do is tell this person's story. And you're right. Is it going to be sympathetic? And who? No. But you're going to, you know, try to tell this person's life story in a way that at least makes sense to the jury and helps them try to understand who he is as a person, separate from what he's done.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? In all fairness here, no matter what conclusion we come to, or they come to, or anybody comes to in a professional manner, it's not going to bring these 4 victims back. And there's going to be no way that you can legitimately justify, again, like I said, the murder of 4 young college students. This is about Ethan, Zaina, Kaylee, and Maddie. But I just put the StreamYard link in the chat because I promised the doc that we would let her go before an hour, and it's 50 minutes. So we're going to stretch this to 55. So if someone has questions related to this case on the forensic psychology side, call into the show. I'm going to look at the chat really quick, and I'm going to say thank you to Canadian Cookie, MAB Investigates. Thank you for being here, Urban Infidel. Thank you, Joey Brooklyn, for being a great moderator. Heather, whatever, is here. And if Joni, you or Bill see anything in the chat, comments or questions, put hashtag Dr. Joni or hashtag bitching with Bill or whatever you want to call them. Whatever you want in the chat, hashtag DutyRon, and then put your questions in there. We'll try to pick them out. But yeah, this is going to be a long road to June. When the next court date is June 26th, we're not going to get a lot of information. And Bill, I know you can agree, and Doc, I know you'll agree with me on this. There's going to be a whole slew of garbage that's going to come out from people speculating, trying to get people to talk. And don't forget, there's going to be a lot of these jagaloons that come out. Let me reach for my sign. You could look this word up, Doc. It's an adult that acts like a child.
That's a new one.
Yeah, jagaloons will come out. What I'm saying is there's going to be people that want their 5 minutes of fame, and they're going to want to get on TV and be on the news. So they're going to put together whatever crazy stories that they think of, and they're going to put it together, and they're going to get out there, and then you're going to hear about it up until June. But, Bill, the next step is not what people are hoping and thinking. It's not going to be the trial date. It's just, again, we're going to get to hear him plea in June if all the stars align right. But look, we talked about this. The summer's coming, and a lot of times these judges, they like to go on vacation. And in these small little towns, we could be looking at a long, hot summer of no trial for Bryan Kohberger.
Ron, you know something? I almost guarantee this case will not go till after September, because at June 26th, they have 5 days of hearings, right? At the last day of hearings, the defense and even the prosecution are going to say, Your Honor, could we put the case off until September? I have vacation. And I guarantee the judge is going to allow that, and it won't go till September or even October.
Yeah, well, I hope you're wrong, but I think you're right, because it doesn't seem like that's a far reach.
No.
Let's say hello to Timmy Acosta in the chat, Lieutenant Pete Pranzo, Harlem Raiders, great friend of Crime Time with DutyRon, and Tim Acosta is the reason why we have Ed Wallace here. So thank you, Timmy, for that. And I want to just say, again, on Saturday night, one of our own, the NYPD, we lost a police officer who was off duty, purchasing a car from Facebook Marketplace. He went into East New York, and police officer Adid Fayez, 26 years young, 5 years on the job, a father of 2 young children, brutally murdered, shot in the head, and he succumbed to his injuries yesterday. I just want to send out prayers, strength, and positive vibes to the fellow members of the 6-6 precinct in Brooklyn and our entire NYPD family. This is a pain that never gets, it never heals. So may he continue to rest in peace, and we'll take it from here, Officer Fayez. So yeah, it's a sad day for the NYPD. So I want to say thank you to both my guests. I guess everybody was scared to call in. We got a bunch of willies out there. I guess maybe it was you, Bill. Maybe they were scared to come up.
No, I hope I didn't scare Dr. Joni for any future.
Bullied her. What are you talking about?
Oh, no way.
For any future appearances on my show. If I invite her on my show now, wait, weren't you the guy who said that profiling was a junk science?
Listen, Dr. Joni Johnston has her own YouTube channel. It is, I'm going to link it. Well, it is actually already linked. I did all of this stuff before we went live. So it's linked in the description. She has books and all this stuff. It's on my website, DutyRon.com. You can go and click on her books. And Doc, you want to talk a little bit about the 101 ways? Give the audience a little bit of your writings.
Well, my most recent book was Serial Killers 101 Questions True Crime Fans Ask, which came from my my readers of my Psychology Today blog over the past 2 years. So awesome. I have them, all of those loyal readers, to thank for all the ideas that they sent me.
Awesome. And, you know, our fans and our subscribers and our community members, they love you. And I hope that you continue to come back here when you can and grace us with your presence, because the knowledge that you share with us, we can't find that anywhere. So we greatly appreciate you. And I want everyone to go over to her YouTube channel and subscribe. And also this guy right down here, Police Off the Cuff, he hit 45,000 subscribers. Let's get him to 50,000 real fast. So everybody go over and subscribe to both of these folks here. They're great friends and professionals, and I thank you guys for taking out the time. Bill, I wanted to go to you for you're always good for these final words. Don't sing, because everyone loves you singing, but give our audience a little bit of a final words from Sergeant Bill Cannon.
You know, I really like the science end of this, and we said right from the very beginning of this case that science was going to solve this case. And part of the science is the behavioral analysis. And I really do like hearing it. I just don't trust it as a viable way to catch a perpetrator, perhaps prevent future crimes, and perhaps, you know, look at the psychology and the background of the perpetrator before he's apprehended, and absolutely after he's apprehended, bring in the forensic psychologist.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. And Doc, final words for you, for the audience that are watching this, are true crime fans.
Yeah, just thank you for having me. And I say this every time I come on, that you have the best fans. I always get the sweetest comments on my YouTube channel after I'm on here. So thank you to all your very gracious and very sweet fans for your nice comments and for being so positive. I really appreciate it. So I know that you deserve all of your fans, Ron, and I'm so glad that you have them.
Thank you so much. And again, I encourage everyone to go over and check out her stuff. I try to push Dr. Joni Johnston into doing more YouTubes, and she promises me that she will, but she doesn't. So I'm going to shame her again.
Yeah,
we want more of you. We can't get enough of you. And I want to also say thank you to all of the replay viewers, the super chatters. Jury sent in a $10 super chat, and we missed it, but I still have it up on the screen. She or he, I believe it's a she. She says, Dr. Joni and Sergeant Bill in the house. We're so blessed with Ed Wallace in the chat. Oh, Ed's in Bangkok, so he's 12 hours ahead of us. He's working. It's 10 o'clock in the morning over there. But she says, we're so blessed to have Ed Wallace in the chat. It's a shame that I didn't even see him. But DutyRon is hosting awesome mods and chat. Peace and love to all. Thank you for that. We greatly appreciate it. All right, guys, on behalf of Crime Time with DutyRon and Ed Wallace, I want to say thank you to Bill from Police Off the Cuff, Sergeant Bill Cannon, and Dr. Joni Johnston. Thank you so much for being here. And as I always like to end these live streams, I like to tell everyone, God bless the world, God bless the United States of America, and God bless each and every one of us here in the chat, but especially these 4 victims, Ethan, Zana, Kaylee, Madison. We send their families strength, prayers, and positive vibes, and all of the prosecution team and the police and community in Moscow. They need us. So let's send them strength and prayers. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you again, and good night from New York.